Our gospel text this morning comes from the 7th chapter of Mark, verses 24 through 37. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there. Yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying that, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." And when she went home, she found the child lying on the bed and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hand on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched the man's tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." Whenever I'm sitting in an airport, I sometimes wonder whether a famous person might walk by. Would I recognize that famous person? Can a person whose face is everywhere really walk through an airport and escape notice? Maybe not. And I think that would be terrible. Imagine all the people coming up to you. Imagine people wanting selfies with you. It would be exhausting. Was Jesus exhausted by his fame? That's the picture I get from today's text. 7 chapters into Mark, Jesus slips into an unidentified house in a non-Jewish region, and the text tells us he did not want anyone to know he was there. Well, how did that work out for him? About like you'd expect. According to the text, he could not escape notice. So, of course, somebody finds him. Somebody who wants more than a selfie. This woman has something to say, and she is going to keep talking until Jesus hears her. What makes people stay in a conversation when it seems to be going badly for them? A lot of times we don't stay. Instead of standing up for our point, we might throw up our hands and say, "Fine," in a voice that you know everything is not fine, and storm out of the room. And now our anger feels more important than the point we were going to make. Now we would rather be angry than heard. But sometimes a person really sticks with it. They might be facing overwhelming odds. They might be rejected at every turn. They might even be insulted, but they will stay in the conversation until someone hears. They will keep on talking as long as they believe that somewhere, someday, someone will hear. And so they keep talking. Hope runs out on the day they decide that no one will hear. For the woman in today's gospel story, hope has not run out. How long had she been seeking her daughter's healing? Weeks? Years? How many people had this woman already asked for help? How many times had she been disappointed? There were people she could go to. Like every culture, first century Palestine had its theories of disease, its causes, and its cures. Not much science involved, but plenty of religion. In the non-Jewish region of Tyre, where this story takes place, the culture was probably saturated with pagan gods and goddesses and lesser divinities. The woman in this story was not raised in the faith of the Jews, but she probably did have confidence that human beings could call on divine help. Now, of course, there were enterprising types always ready to take advantage of her hope. Do you know the story from earlier in Mark of the woman with the issue of blood? Here's what Mark says about her. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had. She was no better, but rather grew worse. Probably this desperate Gentile mother had likewise been to numerous healers describing her daughter's illness and her hope for healing, and time and again she was disappointed. And then she heard about Jesus. And that is how famous Jesus was. Everyone was talking about him, not only Jews. This woman was not a Jew. This region was not Jewish. Some commentators even speculate that Jesus was staying in a Gentile home. After all, he had just recently dismissed the dietary laws that separated Gentiles from Jews. You heard that in Craig's sermon 2 weeks ago from earlier in Mark chapter 7. Jesus declared all foods clean. The Jesus in that story certainly was intent on breaking down some barriers. So it's possible that he slipped into a Gentile home, and maybe that is why the text says he didn't want anyone to know he was there. But more likely, it was a Jewish home. And in that case, the homeowner was in the region's minority. So maybe Jesus wanted to keep quiet so he wouldn't attract more Jews and cause trouble for his friend. Or how about this one? Jesus was afraid that if his presence became obvious, his friend's non-Jewish neighbors would come seeking healing, and Jesus was not there to heal non-Jewish people. After all, Jesus was a product of his earthly culture too. What did Jesus understand about who he was and what he was called to do? Every gospel gives us a different picture. In John, for example, it says that Jesus knew all people and knew what was in everyone. But in Mark, Jesus still has something to learn, even about himself. His understanding develops over time. John's Jesus frequently gives tests. Mark's Jesus frequently takes them, like the one he is about to take from the Syrophoenician woman. She approaches him so boldly. What gives her the courage? Love for her daughter? Certainly. Desperation? Unquestionably. And also her unconquered belief that someone someday will hear her. She is predisposed to believe in divine power, and she believes someone can connect her to it. Someone will help. Someone will hear. So she starts a conversation. She tells Jesus about her daughter and begs him to cast out the demon. She starts a conversation and Jesus tries to stop it. Worse, he attempts to exit the space of the conversation, not just by saying no, but by insulting the woman. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. There's no getting around this, and don't think commentators haven't tried. Some have concentrated on the fact that Jesus uses a diminutive form of the word dogs in Greek. He doesn't say dogs, he says puppies. Who doesn't love puppies? But it is difficult to deny that Jesus has answered hope with insult. It is difficult even to breathe. In the same way that all four Gospels explore Jesus' self-understanding, all four Gospels also consider how and when Jesus' ministry extended beyond the Jews. When did it become apparent that salvation was available to all? In Mark, that crucial revelation is about to occur right here in Jesus' encounter with the Syrophoenician woman. But for one terrible moment, it seems that the door to the kingdom of God is swinging shut, and the one closing it is Jesus. But this bold woman has her foot in the door. She stays in the conversation, and she will not let Jesus leave it either. And that is astonishing, not only in its boldness, but in its hope. After an insult like that, she has no reason to believe that Jesus will hear her. Or does she? Jesus can't escape notice because his reputation precedes him. Who has not heard the stories? They are being told everywhere. The woman has heard that Jesus has healed diseases and cast out demons. She's heard about the leper who said, "If you choose, you can make me clean." And she's heard that Jesus was moved to make that choice. She's heard about the man in the synagogue with a withered hand and how Jesus was grieved because the Pharisees didn't want the man healed on the Sabbath. She's heard about the woman with the issue of blood, bold as herself, who touched Jesus' cloak and was healed. So she's heard not only that Jesus heals, but that he can be moved, he can be grieved, he can be touched. She has heard that he offers radical abundance, feeding 5,000 with 5 loaves of bread and 2 small fish. And she might also have heard that he questioned laws of separation, that he declared all foods clean, that he can break down boundaries. With these stories being told everywhere, how could Jesus escape her notice? She knows who he is. She recognizes him all right. He is her best hope. His presence itself is what gives her the courage to use her voice and keep on using it. So she stays in that conversation. And she answers him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." By using his own metaphor, she insists that he stay in the conversation too. And for that, Jesus rewards her. What does he say? "Your faith has made you well"? No. Jesus rewards her for her very words. It says in this translation, "For saying that, you may go." The King James says, "For this saying, go thy way." The New International Version says, "For such a reply, you may go." The English Standard says, "For this statement, you may go your way. The demon has left your daughter." He rewards her for staying in the conversation and for giving to him the word that refreshes his own exhausted spirit, reopens his eyes to the possibilities of divine power, possibilities that he was at first too reluctant or maybe too much a part of his earthly culture or just too tired to see. And after this encounter, everything changes. Not just for the woman and her daughter, but for the whole world. Because while the woman goes home and finds her daughter healed, Jesus goes out and starts doing ministry for the Gentiles. He performs another healing. That's the one you also heard about in the text with the deaf man. He performs another healing still in this non-Jewish region. And then he feeds another 4,000 people still in a non-Jewish region. And when the second feeding is over, Jesus reproves his disciples for ever doubting that there could be enough bread. All because one determined woman stays in the conversation. And she made Jesus stay there too. Until what could not escape notice was the radical abundance of God's grace. I wonder if they could even have that kind of conversation today. There is certainly strong traffic these days in rejection and insult, but not so much in real discussion. And it is not easy to stay in the conversation. Our desire to be angry can overwhelm our desire to be heard. Or we think we can be heard more clearly on the internet. It is so easy to storm out of the room and back to your computer. Today, the Syrophoenician woman, instead of sticking with her point and moving Jesus' heart, might just go on Facebook and tell everyone how angry she is. Everyone who agreed would give her a like. Everyone who didn't would send her an angry message. No hearts would be changed, and neither would the world. But today, she might not come to Jesus in the first place. A person looking for hope today might not look to the church. Today, the woman might point to the church's poor record on dealing with wounds like racism and sexual abuse as evidence that the church cannot be trusted to hear her story. Or, as a product of today's culture, she might assume that humans are just without divine help. Or she might not think about the church because it's just not relevant. Possibly the church and even the presence of Jesus simply escapes her notice. If the presence of Jesus escapes notice today, it is no one's fault but our own. It is our fault for not telling the stories that once made his reputation precede him. It is our fault for not living his example. It is our fault for not staying in the conversation when we are challenged by new ideas or difficult personalities. As long as there are people with stories of their own, we, the church, must demonstrate our willingness to stay in the conversation, even to the point of letting it change us. We must make it obvious that we will hear. Because when people stop believing that someone will hear them, they stop talking. Sometimes they start shooting. We must make the presence of Jesus obvious in the world, so obvious that Jesus cannot escape notice. As long as the world can't help noticing Jesus is here, the world will know that there is hope. The world will know that someone hears. The presence of Christ gives people courage to use their voices, to ask for what they need, and even to refresh the perspective of other believers and keep us all in the conversation. This is how people learn. This is how hearts are changed, and changing hearts changes the world. Amen.